Thank you, Rabbi Werber. And thank you, CBST. Hey. So I want to start off with a question that I think I know the answer to, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So how many of you here are connected to actors, musicians, or like performing arts people generally? Yeah, strong show. This is what I figured. Okay, great. It's nice to challenge and test one's assumptions. So if you happen to follow any of us on social media, you might be aware of a particular hashtag that we like to use. When you see a post about a singer's upcoming season, an instrumentalist who just won an orchestra seat, or an actor's next or first Broadway gig, the hashtag thrilled to announce is generally not far behind. And in my capacity and identity as a semi-retired opera singer, I am hashtag thrilled to announce that we have reached our final Parsha of Leviticus. Naturally, it's a twofer, Behar-Bechukotai. And in the first Josh that I gave on April 4th, which was the first Parsha of Leviticus, I confessed to this congregation that I struggle with this book for a lot of different reasons. And the struggle this time, while still present, has been really generative. One might even say it's been healing. Tremendous acts of transformation become possible when we peel back the layers of what we've been led to believe and instead make meaning for ourselves. And I am so grateful for the truth of that. In an essay on the first Parsha of our double portion, Behar, Rabbi Jacob Staub argues that we can ground queer perspective in this Parsha. Queer perspective, Leviticus, this same book that has been used to demonize so many of us for thousands of years. Rabbi, what are you talking about? And what he's talking about comes down to how do we define queer perspective. Staub goes on to teach that the queer perspective is one that questions all norms, not just norms of gender roles and definitions or sexual orientation, but all norms, power, class, privilege. Thinking about queer perspective in this way leads me to suggest, something perhaps radical. That armed with this definition of queer perspective, Leviticus can be read as an inherently or canonically queer text. Okay, go with me. We're going to get there. I promise we're going to get there together. So in Leviticus 18:3, God sets forth the norms that the roving Israelite nation is not to follow. You shall not copy the practices of the land of Egypt, where you dwelt, or of the land of Canaan, to which I am taking you, nor shall you follow their laws. Folks, what we have here is a binary. God says, don't do this, and you better not do this other thing, which tells us that there is yet a third way, that there is a non-binary way of being. And as readers and interpreters of this text, there's an imminence to these words of Leviticus that we may not necessarily get to experience or fully appreciate. At this point, the Israelites don't know that they're going to be wandering for 40 full years before they get to the Promised Land. That happens in the next book. Spoiler alert. They know that they've been wandering for about a year. And in that wandering, the promises of this land, and therefore this new queer society that they will be building, are tangible. They're imminent. Again, we need to center this idea that queer perspective is one that challenges or is in opposition to societal norms. Leviticus, in that way, sets up a framework for creating a queer society, one that is set apart from the experience of enslavement in Egypt and the societal strictures of the land of Canaan to where they are being led to. I want you to think for a moment of a bar stool, right? If a bar stool is representative of this society, then each of the three legs on this bar stool are one element or leg that society needs. Parshat Behar-Bechukotai teaches us what those three elements are. The first is a collective experience, a watershed moment. What's our origin story? What moment or experience in our shared history binds us all together? For the ancient Israelites, this experience is the Exodus from Egypt, which God reminds us of at least 3 times in this parsha with those very familiar words, Ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim. I am Adonai your God who brought you out from the land of Egypt. So we have our first element, our collective identity experience. Next is a shared spiritual or religious identity or language. Israelite religion as practiced in Torah, predates the idea of and the term Judaism, but obviously there's some overlap there. The tenets of this Israelite religion include not worshiping idols, keeping Shabbat, following a system of sacrifices and offerings, and just generally following the laws and commandments that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh sets forth. And just as there is divine reward, like rain in the right season, living in peace, easily defeating our enemies, for following these laws, there is also severe punishment for not. Famine, war, cannibalism, it's all in there. And it's not a pretty picture. And the third thing that this burgeoning emergent society needs is an economic system. Some mechanism by which to establish the value of goods, services, people, and animals. Leviticus 27 describes one kind of curious component of this economic system in which people vow monetary values to God. And when I first read about this, I was like, are they bribing God? What do they mean by vowing money to God? And so I checked out the work of the Spanish medieval commentator Abraham ibn Ezra, and he says, no, you got it all wrong. It's like this. You go to the priest and you say, okay, priest, if God does X thing for me, then I will give the monetary value of Y in return. It still sounds kind of bribey, but it's the system that was working at the time. The rest of the chapter goes on to elucidate the value of lives, human and animal, and it gets into stratifications of gender, of age, of ability. It's also, again, not a pretty picture. They also go on to talk about other collateral and the process by which the priests will conduct their economic assessments. But the features of this economic system that I think are really interesting and I want to focus on are Shemitah and Yovel. And the laws of Shemitah are such that every 6 years of cultivating, sowing, and reaping, land has to lie fallow in its 7th year. No cultivating, no reaping, whatever grows is what grows. That's it. And in a later iteration of Shemitah, when we revisit this in the book of Deuteronomy, the releasing of debt is explicitly named as being wiped away in the Shemitah cycle. And so after 7 of these cycles, we get Yovel, or Jubilee. And the idea in Yovel is that any land that was bought or sold in this time returns to its original owner, and any Israelite who happens to be in the service of someone else, and that's a very explicit, specific way of saying that, shall be set free. The Israelites are further instructed not to price gouge or charge exorbitant interest, and should a fellow Israelite come under their possession, to not treat them ruthlessly, a direct reference to how the Israelites were treated in Egypt. Further, the Israelites receive multiple ways of redeeming a kinsperson from their bondage so that they don't have to wait until Yovel. That's a lot built into these two ideas. And now the laws of Shemitah and Yovel rest on 3 very important things. The first is that there is no permanent human possession of land. Leviticus 25:23 says, but the land must not be sold beyond reclaim, for the land is mine. This is God talking, to be clear. You are but strangers resident with me. No permanent human possession of land. The second is that the Israelites are not to be treated as slaves. Leviticus 25:42-43 says, for they are my servants whom I freed from the land of Egypt. They may not give themselves over into servitude. You shall not rule over them ruthlessly. You shall fear your God. And the third important needful fact of this is that this relies on presence in the land. Leviticus 25:2, how our parsha opens, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assign to you, the land shall observe a Sabbath of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. That land being what we call Eretz Israel. And it's this third idea, this third truth, this third fact, that's a bit of a sticky wicket in how we decide to interpret these laws. It leads to, I think, an obvious question. And that question is, what is my relationship to these laws if I'm not in the land? And the answer to that question lies in how one defines the land and where it is. Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to travel to Nigeria to learn from and be in community with the Igbo Jewish population. We spent Shabbat together, we broke bread, we danced, we taught each other formally and informally. It was an incredible 2-week experience. And after Shabbat morning services, I happened to overhear a conversation between a member of my traveling group and one of the people from the community in Nigeria. The person from my group remarked how beautiful it was that all of us, Black Jews from North America and South America and African Jews, were all observing Shabbat together. and how one day he wanted to see us all together in the land. And the person from the Ogidi community said something I will never forget. He says, Achi, my brother, we are B'nai Israel. We are the children of Israel. The land is wherever we are. In that moment, and even now, I am struck by the powerful simplicity and the matter-of-factness in which he said this. If we can see ourselves and each other as pieces of the land, a blade of its grass, a drop of water from its seas, or a bud of its hyacinth flowers, then Shemitah and Yovel are for us too. Adam Smith, the 18th century Scottish economist and philosopher, often praised as being the father of capitalism and modern economic thought, believed that people were intrinsically guided by an invisible hand of self-interest. He posited that collectively all of the choices we make are for our own fulfillment, our own pleasure, our own leisure, etc., but that they often have unintended, albeit positive, impacts on society. This system of rugged independence and self-interest is what we are in now, and we have been here for centuries. And if I may be so bold as to say, it's not working so well for so many of us most of the time. Shemitah and Yovel offer us an alternative. They teach us rugged interdependence. And for this emergent Israelite nation, the imminence of applying these laws and establishing this new queer society was predicated on their proximity to entering into the land. But what about our current moment? What about here on 30th Street? What about here on our call hall in the cloud? Aside from its real and tangible application to agriculture, Shemitah invites us to check in with ourselves and ask some questions. Questions like, what areas or situations in my life have I spent a lot of time cultivating? What actually needs further cultivation? What needs to lay fallow and untended? What must I release? What do I need to let go of? This is Shemitah on the personal level. And for the God who's speaking in this parsha, the most unfathomable and unacceptable outcome for any of the Israelites is to be enslaved again, to be treated befarech, with severity or ruthlessness like they were in Egypt. On a collective level, Yovel asks us to confront the ways in which members of our communities are still shackled and are still held in bondage by their systems of oppression. And when we, as individuals, find ourselves in positions of capacity and not just power, it is up to us to do what we can to release one another from these bonds. As Toni Morrison taught to her students, if you are free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. The authors of Vayikra knew that not only would the Israelites leave Egypt as a mixed multitude, as an Erev Rav, but that it would remain a mixed multitude. That the peace, the safety, and the freedom of one is bound up in the freedom, peace, and safety of the other. As we learn in Leviticus 19:34, or as God tells us in Leviticus 19:34, the strangers who reside with you shall be to you as your citizens. You shall love each one as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. If what they say is true, that the only way out is through, then folks, the only way through is together. Ruggedly, stubbornly, queerly interdependent. Shabbat shalom.